Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Profiles in Excellence, Homeland Security Today's recognition and introduction to the community of some of the most amazing people who have won awards at the Homeland Security Today Awards. This interview is very exciting for me because cyber is such a huge topic, but also because the Department of Homeland Security is celebrating its 20 years of existence. And so this conversation comes from someone who certainly worked at the department and supported the cyber mission in many of his roles in government. And for that, we're very excited to welcome J. Michael Daniel, who's the president and one of the founding CEOs members of the Cyber Threat Alliance. Welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Of course. So tell us a little bit about your career because it is quite amazing. You were at OMB, you served as advisor to the president on cybersecurity matters, which, wow, what a tremendous responsibility, and certainly leading the development of government-wide cyber policy. So please tell us a little bit about you and your tremendous career on behalf of the nation.
Well, thanks, Christina. So I spent, as you noted, I spent about 21 and a half years in the U.S. government. I started my career back in the dinosaur times of the mid 90s, and started work at the Office of Management and Budget in the National Security Division there. And my work was primarily on Navy and Marine Corps operational programs. And my academic background is actually mostly in international affairs and security, but a very heavy economics, international trade. So that's how I kind of ended up in doing budgeting and finance work, is because that's where a lot of my academic background was. Spent a lot of time on contingency operations, is what we used to call them, back in the late 90s. And then after the September 11th attacks, I was promoted to chief of the intelligence branch. And so that was actually where I ended up getting involved in cyber, because in about the mid 2000s or so, our intelligence agencies started asking for very large amounts of money for this thing called cyber. And nobody in OMB or the White House understood exactly what this cyber thing was. And so the director at the time looked at me and another guy, and he was like, "You two, go get smart on this cyber thing." And that was, what started me down this cybersecurity path. And just over time, I started spending more and more of my time, not just on the intelligence community's spending on cyber, but the government's spending on cyber. And I eventually sort of came to run the cybersecurity crosscut at OMB, meaning looking at how all of the government was spending its money, including the Department of Homeland Security, on cybersecurity. And then in 2012, the administration asked me to come over and be President Obama's, cybersecurity advisor. And I think a lot of that was driven, not because of I'm not a coder, right? It's not because I had run firewalls or things like that, but I knew how the government worked and I understood how the funding worked. And that was what the administration really needed in, looking at cybersecurity policy at the time, was how do we actually get the government better aligned and resources better aligned on this cybersecurity issue. After the end of the Obama administration, I left for the private sector, and I've been running this organization that you noted, the Cyber Threat Alliance, and we're a nonprofit information sharing organization. So our role in all of this is making sure that cybersecurity companies can actually share threat intelligence with each other, and do it at speed, at scale. And that's what I've been doing since 2017.
Absolutely. Very familiar with that as a former president of the InfraGard National Chapter. So yes, sharing information to protect critical infrastructure is so huge. And certainly the cyber threat for much of our critical infrastructure is growing every day. Physical too, but cyber is certainly a priority. So tell us a little bit about your work, specifically that adds to the security of the nation, and certainly that kind of won you this award.
Well, I think a lot of what we do, right, at the Cyber Threat Alliance is really about how do we actually do really kind of three missions. Uh, how do we enable our cybersecurity companies to do a better job sharing threat intelligence with each other so they can better protect you and your readers and everyone else, right? How do we actually make them better at what they do? And then how do we use the shared information that we have to enable government, um, governments around the world to actually impose more costs on the bad guys, actually disrupt what they're doing? And then how do we as an organization advocate for policies and rules and things that actually improve the cybersecurity of the digital ecosystem? And so really that is what CTA is all about. That's what we do. And so we are, every day we're trying to figure out how we can add to the security of that digital ecosystem. And as you noted, well, that digital ecosystem is now everywhere, right? It's in our critical infrastructure. It affects everyone. It affects, even if you don't think you use computers very much, like, you are reliant on organizations that do. And so this is really now a critical part of our, not just national security, but our economic prosperity and our public health and safety, really. And so I think that is really that's the driver behind, our contribution to security.
Absolutely. And it sounds like you had to walk a very fine balance between security and certainly the competitive posture of a cybersecurity company. What are your comments, or how would you advise others who are trying to, kind of get competimates or competitors to do the right thing in security?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that so first of all, one of the really interesting things about cybersecurity companies is, I think more than a large part of than people in the private sector, like they feel the sense of mission. They know that they're on the front lines, fighting malicious actors, and that is baked into their culture. But beyond that, one of the things that we've learned with CTA is that you really have to understand and pitch and balance and meet the competitive needs. Like there has to be something in it for the companies, right? They are companies in it to make money, and that's okay because that's how the US is set up. And so in the case of CTA, for example, one of our arguments is like, look, you actually don't compete and get a competitive advantage on the raw data. Like the raw data is really not what people buy from you. What you sell as a cybersecurity company is what you do with the data. That's your competitive advantage. And so if we can actually get you to share the data with each other, then everybody is better off. And if you are competing at a higher level of the sort of on the value chain, right? Not the raw data down here at the low end, but on what you do with the data up at the high end, that's actually better for society, right? That's a higher level of competition, and that's what we want. We want that innovation in defense and the competition up at that level. And if all of our cybersecurity companies are better off, then society is also better off. And so from our perspective, we see that as a net gain, both for at the individual company level and for society. And that's the kind of thing that you have to look for in this space is where can you make the improvements? Where can you make the changes? Where can you make the adaptations that both improve security or improve the bottom line for, an individual cybersecurity company, but also contributes to the, raising the security across the ecosystem. And that's the sweet spot that you have to shoot for.
Absolutely. We saw that a lot at InfraGard, and actually stood up a particular information sharing network for hospitals so that those CIOs could share with each other as quickly as possible. Because you're talking about patient lives. And now, as you said, our refrigerators are monitoring us. You've got equipment in the hospitals that is, it's possible that it's hacked. So the threats are so broad and so wide that these cyber companies are becoming more and more important every day. So your organization's amazing. So, how do you really build that culture and trust between the government and the private sector? Because you did that for much of your career. And right now, you look around, there are a lot of people who have a lot of opinions about the government. And you seem to overcome that and build a really trusted network. How did you do that?
There's a couple of things that I've often thought about on that score. And none of this is going to sound all that shocking, and most of it uh, most of it people actually learned in kindergarten. I mean, there's some, uh, you know, the but in seriousness, it's like it's being honest and forthright about, and if you not it doesn't mean you have to explain everything, because there are things that are, classified or that are private information on both sides, and you respect that, but you are forthright and honest in what you say, and you mean what you say, and you commit and you make your commitments, right? You meet your commitments. um that's the foundation of it, and you have to build that relationship over time. I think the other piece of it was never assuming that either extreme was true. And what I mean by that is never assuming that the government had all of the answers, and that it needed to learn and listen from the private sector, but also to come to the table with the understanding that the government does bring something to the table. And, that both the private sector and the government have legitimate perspectives. They are different, not better, not worse, just different. And you have to understand what those perspectives are. And if you respect that, um, and you approach your discussions knowing what those different perspectives are and working with them rather than trying to work against them, and I mean that in both directions, then I think you can be much more successful at finding those spaces where you can actually get agreement, where you can make progress. um, the other thing is just spending time, and you have to spend the time to get to know people and to listen to people. And there's for all of our digital nature, right, there is still no substitute for those human to human interactions and the trust that builds up from working with people over time.
Absolutely. That's yes, building any good relationship, trust, honesty. We know sometimes things get overrun by politics and other things that doesn't do anyone any favors. But yes, those are certainly the stalwarts of any good relationship. So
Yeah.
you've seen that the new cyber strategy has come out, and I know that we didn't prep you for this question, but I thought we'd ask, since I was going to ask what you think we should focus on in the future. I'll ask that and then ask how you see the cyber strategy working toward what you think we need for the future.
Well, when you look at where we are, in cybersecurity, I don't think anyone would argue that things are going great, right? I don't think anybody would argue that what we have now is sufficient. And so the question is, if that's the case, then what do we do about it? And I think simply doing more of the same is probably not going to get us, like just doing more of the same, only maybe faster and bigger, is probably not going to get us to where we want to go. And so we need to start having some different approaches to managing our cybersecurity. And I think, to get at your next question about how the national cybersecurity strategy fits into that, I think it starts to actually point in a lot of those directions. If you look at the pillars that are in that strategy, one of them is like, okay, clearly the level of cybersecurity that we have at individual organizations across, much of the ecosystem is not sufficient. And some organizations have not invested up to the level that they need to in cybersecurity. And so in those places, we're going to have to raise the floor. Now, at the same time, we also need to make sure that we're not overly complicating things. And particularly people that are in the financial services industry feel this all the time because they face numerous banking regulators, for example, that have slightly different, regulatory requirements, which is really annoying. And so doesn't actually contribute to cybersecurity. Then at the same time, we have to recognize that we've in fact actually put the cybersecurity burden all on the end user for the most part. And that is the place where many of those end users are the least capable and we have the least leverage. And that doesn't make any sense. And so we need to actually start talking about how we shift and reallocate some, not all, some of that security burden to other parts of the ecosystem where we have greater leverage. And can, where smaller changes can result in more security across the ecosystem. And then, the third piece that I would highlight is we really have to pick up the cadence of disrupting what the bad guys are doing. So things like the Emotet takedown, things like the Hive takedown, right? Those kinds of disruption operations, the arrests that we've seen. I tease my reporter friends that I'm like, I want those events to be happening so frequently that you can't even keep up. And in fact, I want them happening so frequently you don't even bother reporting on them because they're not news. Like, and I'd say, it's not because I want to make your job difficult, it's because I want them happening so often that it's just not news anymore. And that cybercrime in particular becomes a much less lucrative business. So those are the, and you can see all of those themes in the national cybersecurity strategy of, the shifts that we need to start making if we actually want to, change the dynamics of cybersecurity in our digital ecosystem.
Yes, and the Emotet takedown, the lead from that won an award at the Holiday Awards. So we are seeing that more, and you're absolutely right. I mean, we've all been talking about cyber hygiene for I don't know how long, and people's eyes just glaze over, and they still want those Redskins tickets, so they're not going to stop. So I love, that different approach is probably exactly where we need to go. Well, I want to thank you very much for spending some time with us today. We always welcome your thoughts and contributions to HS Today, and just want to congratulate you again on your mission award. Cyber is, like you said, it's mind-boggling, it's everywhere, and you are one of the heroes tackling that for us. So thank you very much. And if you have any parting words of wisdom, please impart them now.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think what I would say in this space is that fundamentally, I am actually, I know it's hard to believe, but I am actually an optimist. It is very easy to be pessimistic
Have to be an optimist in cyber.
Yes. I mean, it's actually very easy to be pessimistic, right? And, I had another colleague of mine, Herb Lynn, out at Stanford one time said, it's very easy to be a cybersecurity expert. Just declare that tomorrow will be worse than today, and you'll probably be right. But I think that the truth is, right, we built cyberspace. It is a domain that we constructed. We made the rules for it. And so none of these rules, none of the way that we have structured it is set in stone, and we can change it and we can improve it. And so I don't think we have to settle for the current state of things. And so my parting words of wisdom is don't become fatalistic about the state of things. We can change it and improve it. It takes work, it takes willpower, but it is possible to do.
Well, that's an awesome parting bunch of words of wisdom. So we appreciate the optimism and certainly look forward to working with you in the coming years. And seeing this kind of transformation of where the responsibility for cyber is, at least in part. So thank you for your hard work, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a great day.
Excellent. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.